This is Karen with newclevelandradio.net, and it is time for isms. And again, you may ask, what is isms? Isms in this podcast is about the positive things that we can do to get through challenging times. My guest today is Chuck Yarborough, and many of you may remember Chuck from the entertainment section in The Plain Dealer. Um, when I first met Chuck, he was still writing for the Plain Dealer before the Plain Dealer let just about everybody go. I mean, makes no sense. It was our loyal newspaper, and now we really don't have much in the newspaper other than some ads. But Chuck still has a voice, and I appreciate his voice because he has friends and acquaintances on both sides of the fence. And in today's world, that's difficult for a lot of people. They're making a choice. They're putting a line in the sand and saying, if you don't agree with me, you're not my friend. If you agree with me, you are. Well, you know what? I come from a family that, um, on my mother's side, I am second generation American. On my father's side, I'm third generation American. Most of us are not Native Americans. So therefore, we have all come from different countries for different reasons. So, Chuck, one of the things I admire so much about you is that you just love people. You can be a friend to anybody. How did you develop that kind of personality? I mean, obviously, it must have been ingrained when you were growing up and
Well, I mean, part of it is my father was a career Army officer. So I lived everywhere from Alaska to Florida. I went to 22 different schools by the eighth grade. Um, you either had to make friends quickly or spend a lot of time in your room. Um, Now, the irony of all of that is that we would go to Fort Greely, Alaska, and be sent to Fort Rucker, Alabama, and we'd have the same friends because their dads were in the military too. And my dad was an aviator. So Army aviation, even during the Vietnam War, was a fairly small community.
so you got to meet lots of people. And again, like you said, unless you wanted to be isolated, um, you didn't have a choice. You had to get out and make friends.
Right. And the other part is being a journalist too. You have to be able to put aside your biases and preconceived notions and ask questions. And I really loved asking questions, and sometimes they were none of my business. But at the same time, I think one of my strengths as a reporter was doing interviews and getting people to tell me things that they didn't really want to tell me.
Well, and that's the good part of a writer and an interviewer. I know when I first started podcasting about 11 years ago, I was very, very careful. I was almost afraid to say, and Chuck, what was your background like? It would have been like, no, no, no. I would have only asked little questions. But today I realize that I can ask those questions, but you also have the right not to answer them. And that's what I'd like our listeners to understand that, if somebody comes up to you and will ask you a question that maybe you don't agree with them, you don't have to respond. You could just answer back with either no response or say, I'd rather speak about something else. And that's how I was brought up.
Right.
Um, so, one of the things that we were talking about before we came on air is that there's a lot of disruption going on right now in our country. A lot of the things that you and I grew up with understanding in the United States, those things are being dismantled or they're being talked about being dismantled. I know for me, it scares me because I think about my mother's parents who left what was then Russia, it is now Ukraine, in the early 1900s um, to get away from the Cossacks that were destroying their villages. and they were destroying the villages because my grandparents were Jewish. So anybody in those villages, they were being gathered up and basically they were being killed. My grandfather came to America. He found a relative here who sponsored him. He came here, he got a job, he started learning English. Once he had enough money, he went all the way back, brought my grandmother here with two little babies, and they began a life. And they became citizens. And they did everything that we would want an American citizen to do. You and I know there are American citizens who are living here who have come from all different countries, from Mexico, from Guatemala, from God knows where, and they're being picked up in droves and they're being put in concentration camps, so to speak. How does that fit into everything that you learned and everything that you stood for, especially when you were in the military?
When we lived in Fort Rucker, Alabama, on one of our tours, we had a Major Dorsey Whitehead on one side of us who was black, and I had my friend at the time, Donald Norgard, who was Norwegian and blonde hair, blue eyed, all that stuff. And then me who's part American Indian and mostly English. So it was a very diverse community. So we kind of worked at it from that end. And we all kind of had to get along because you never really knew if your dad was going to come back. It's kind of like being the child of a cop, you know? So we were all very close.
So as you grew up, you took all that camaraderie and love for other people into your adult life. So we were also talking before we came on here that you have a son-in-law who's in the service, okay, but originally wasn't from the United States, but became a citizen and he's serving the United States. How does that make him any less of a citizen than maybe you and I?
Technically, he is a citizen because he's from
Right.
Puerto Rico. So he
Okay.
is, only Donald Trump doesn't realize that Puerto Rico is part of the US. We can take Greenland and we can take Canada but we can't take the parts of the country we already have.
Right.
But he was in the Navy for 8 years and now works for the federal government. And he has two sons. And I would venture to say that he's terrified. He's devoted 25 years of his life to serve in this country. And ICE can just roll up into his house and take him away. And that's just not what this country is supposed to be.
Exactly. Exactly.
It's so hard to reconcile what's happening with what my father fought for. You know, I I asked my dad one time, he went to Vietnam 3 times. And the third time, I said, why do you keep going back? I mean, you've already done your bit. You've done 2 years under fire. We got all kinds of medals to prove it. Why do you keep going back? And he said, because if I go, somebody else doesn't have to. And
Wow.
that is what the America that I believe in is all about. I'll suffer so that you don't have to. That's
It's
why
in,
I'm one of
yeah,
those idiots who says, let's forgive student debt.
yeah.
I had to pay mine, so what? Doesn't matter. It doesn't mean you have to, everybody should have to suffer.
Well, growing up, I had learned that my father could not serve in the Army. He went down and enlisted, and within 2 hours, they said, you have flat feet and ulcers. We don't want you. And my father went home and told my mother in tears that he could not fight in World War II. Now, my mother was grateful because she got to have her husband here. But she said that she understood his whole life, how he felt like he had let people down. And yes, he did work in one of the war plants. So that sort of gave him some, I guess, encouragement that he was doing the right thing. But you're right. We were brought up here in America to do what you have to do to save yourself, save your country. Um,
Exactly.
and kudos to your dad, because there were a lot of people who didn't go to Vietnam because they were terrified of it, or after one round would not sign up to go back. But in addition to all that, where do you think we sort of have gone wrong? And I say wrong in the fact that we're allowing everything to change overnight. Where is our smarts of saying, hey, we're supposed to vote on these things. We're supposed to understand it better. And yet there are so many of us who just don't understand what's happening.
Well, uh, Justice Sotomayor just came out with, she had a speech in a college in Florida, and she was pointing out that the founding fathers were, in her words, hell-bent on making sure that there was a system of checks and balances. Um, and it appears that we didn't want a monarchy. George Washington didn't want to be king. We did not want a monarchy. That's why they established the executive, judicial, and legislative. Uh, but it appears that we're going more and more towards a monarchy, and the legislative branch is not willing to step up and do its job. So what Justice Sotomayor said was, it's up to the courts now to make sure that we follow the rule of law and have the country that we had and should have.
So, but in the meantime, you're, you know, she's speaking up, she's right, but we have somebody who is working in the White House who is not an elected official. Um, I'm assuming he is a citizen of the United States from everything that I've read, but he's controlling, and he's saying that forget the judicial system, that they should not have any say. What happens to checks and balances then?
That's a great question, and I think it's something that we're going to see. It puts even more emphasis, though, on what's coming up in 2026. The midterm elections have never been more important because this Republican Congress is not going to stand up to Trump. They're just not. They've shown that in all ways, shape, and form. Uh, they're not doing the right thing. Now, how hard is it to do the right thing? Apparently impossible if you have GOP after your name.
So, as citizens ourselves, somebody said to me the other day, if you're unhappy with what you see going on, rate your senators, rate your congressmen.
Mhm.
Now, right now here in Ohio, we have senators who are Republican, who probably won't listen to us. But my question is, do you think if enough of us were to write and tell them, hey, you are supposedly representing me, and this is what I don't like, this is what I would like to see, do you think we can get them to listen?
I hope so, but I don't know. I mean, the the actions of people like Jim Jordan and Bernie Moreno, who's shown a total disregard for law, and like when he cheated his employees out of their overtime.
Right.
Um, and now we'll see what John Husted does. I don't know what that's going to be like. I did leave a message at their offices saying, listen, you got to stop this. Elon Musk is not an elected official. He, he's stopping aid. You're sending money to spending $20 million to send a president to a Super Bowl, but you're cutting off childhood cancer research. this is not right. This is not who we are.
Ex
But apparently it is who we are. So that's why the 2026 midterms are so, so crucial.
well, and I think our listeners have to take a step back. I know it sounded exciting during the campaign, hearing the administrator's message, we're going to make America great again. Well, as far as I'm concerned, America is great. We just have to keep it great. Okay. It's not great again. Because what we're saying is that somebody failed us, but okay. We didn't just fail in the last 4 years. Okay. It takes time for things to get better and time for things to get worse. But as I look forward, I don't see how anything is getting even better in the first couple of weeks like we were promised. Gas prices have gone up. Okay. Maybe not huge amounts, but it's gone up. It hasn't dropped. The egg prices we know are going up for two reasons. One is bird flu. And if there truly is bird flu, like they say, and we don't care about vaccines or anything medically to take care of people, then we're in a lot of trouble right there just with this one disease. How do we get the people who listen to the rhetoric to see that maybe things aren't gonna get better?
Well, they're not. I mean, even Trump and Musk admitted there's going to be a lot of pain as we do this. Well, you're inflicting it, so you should know. It's not going to get better until we can do something about it. And as I say, the 2026 elections are the only way we can do something. We individuals can do something about it. But I do agree with you that we should call, write, telegrams, semaphore. I don't care, just some way. Let your legislators know that this is not acceptable. This is not who you want to be viewed. You don't want the United States viewed as this kind of bully, and hedonistic bully. It's
Right.
just
Well, and when you hear that, the United States, and I should say this administration, wants Canada, wants Mexico, wants Greenland, wants to take over Gaza. It's like, wait a second, we have people who are starving here in the United States.
right.
Let's not worry about all those others. Canada's doing fine on its own, and they're an ally. Why stir anything up? Same thing with Greenland. Okay.
Mhm.
Mexico can be a really good ally. We don't have to be, at heads with them. To take over Gaza, I mean, number one, it's in the other side of the world. And what are we going to do with it? And why displace all those people who are already displaced? If we want to be good humanitarian, let's help go rebuild it so those people can move back.
Agreed.
So 2 years from now, there's going to be another election. But we can start making our voices heard now. It also means that we have to find strong enough people to run for those offices instead of sitting back waiting for somebody else to do it and then complaining.
That's true. And that is the biggest issue that we probably face. I don't see those people on the horizon. There are some who are exceptionally gifted. I think Gavin Newsom would be a really good president. I think Mayor Pete, although I don't know that the U.S. is quite ready for a gay president or a gay vice president. The inherent bigotry is there. But those two administrators, they're strong, they're fair. Our own Sherrod Brown would have been an outstanding president.
Absolutely.
I once told his wife, Connie, who worked with me at the Plain Dealer, the only reason I would ever leave the Plain Dealer was to go become his press secretary.
I love that. I love that. Yes. It will be interesting to see where he lands in the future because he is a person for the people.
Oh,
Totally.
I agree. And knows baseball better than anybody I've ever met.
And you know, that's what our history books tell us about when you go to elect an official. They are supposed to be there for their constituents. And if
Mhm.
your representative, I don't care if it's your local city representative, your state, or federal, if they're not looking out for the majority of you, then we've got to get the word out. We've got to let them know that we are disappointed. But we don't have to yell and scream. We don't have to have, a violent on street demonstration. We can do these things in a manner that we can be heard and not make any kind of destructive manner along the way.
Well, I think your podcast is a good example of that. There's also Substack. There's some wonderful writers. You sort of touched on it earlier, but in a different light. One of the biggest problems that we have right now is the decline of the media. Um, we are reporters are seen as with less respect than lawyers.
Yes, absolutely.
And that's sad. I mean, people don't realize the ethical training that we had to go through. And the other part of that is now because so many papers have shuttered or reduced their staffs, um, the ones who are coming along are not getting the training. When I first started my first daily newspaper, it was the Baytown Sun in Texas, and we used a system called OCR. So you would type it on an IBM Selectric, had the little round ball, and the city editor could edit it. The scanner wouldn't see red, so he would edit it in red and cross things out with the black felt tip. The first story I turned into him, his name was Preston L. Pendergrass. First story I turned into him, he gave it back to me, and it looked like Lizzie Borden had taken an axe to it. It was covered in red. And I went, Preston, what's wrong with this? He goes, I'm gonna make a reporter out of you if it kills us both. But
Well,
he did. He turned me into I think a fairly decent reporter. Um, and Preston, though, came up the hard way. His first job in newspapers was as a cub reporter and his first story was interviewing the judge of the Scopes monkey trial for an anniversary piece. That's how long Preston had been around. Uh, and he just was one of the greatest guys I've ever met in my life. I just adored him. But he did turn me into a reporter. And I got a lot of those stories covered in red.
but it's interesting that you say that because you and I come from an era where we had to be right. I mean, things had to be fixed. Okay.
Right.
Um, in school, you would get a paperback and you would think that I did all the research, I did this all correct. And the teacher would come back with, grammar marks and everything else and say, hey, until it's right, I don't want to see it again. And I remember many years crying over papers that I had put so much energy into. I also know when I first started blogging for a medical company, I had gone through like 3 months of interviews with them. And they were telling me how impressed they were. And my first blog I sent to them and talk about red marks. And I went back and I said, but this is the information. This is where I found it from. And I had documented it. And they would come back and say, this is not a good publication. And they would tell me why, and they would tell me how to look for the right publications to find the real information. And it took me almost 6 months before I could actually write a blog for them that maybe came through with, Karen, you spelled this one word wrong. But I learned how to do the work correctly.
Right.
Today, we're not being taught, people are being hired for jobs that they're not even qualified for.
Correct.
And then,
In a lot of places, like the White House.
Yeah, in many places.
Yeah.
But we can speak up, and that's the point that I want our listeners to hear is that you you don't have to be silent, but you have to have your facts right. So don't go out and say that, you know, the president said this when he really didn't say it.
Right.
If you have the facts, go ahead, document it, and you can say it. Then you can say how you feel about it. Okay. And there's a difference between stating the fact of this is what was said and this is how I feel.
Right.
But document why you feel that way. What about all the training you've had?
Exactly. And as you said, when they sent your blogs back to you, in newspapers, the first people that they fired were copy editors, probably the most important people on the staff. They'll make sure that your grammar is correct, your syntax is correct, you're using the right word, um, and they'll fact check. We have to do that. One of the problems we have, quite frankly, is Facebook and Instagram and X and all those things. It's just too easy to put incorrect, unfactual information out there, and just memes. We speak in memes, and
Yes.
that's a problem.
Well, we can't change the whole world overnight. We do know that, although it feels like it's changing overnight.
Certainly does.
Um, I am feeling very grateful right now for the last 2 years. My son was living in the state of Texas, and I know you've lived in Texas, but being somebody on the blue side, it was very difficult for the 2 years that he lived there. And he had mentioned that um, as he was trying to date as a young man, um, it was even more and more difficult. In fact, on some of the dating apps, he would even be asked, "Are you red or blue?" And as soon as he'd say blue, it'd be like they blow him off. Um, how sad that is because I know many people in our generation, they never asked before they were getting married, "Are you red or blue? Or what do you believe in?"
Yeah, you weren't supposed to ask, but you were kind of going to show what you believed in.
Exactly. Exactly. So, what are some of the things you do positively for yourself on the days that, um, you know, people don't like what you have to say? And I know that I've seen it on Facebook. You've had a few people who have been a little bit, I'm going to just say rude, put it nicely.
Yeah. Well, part of it, one of the ways to get through it is the 42 years I spent in newspapers because you were going to tick somebody off. They used to say if you're not making somebody mad, you weren't doing your job. Um, and that went from when I was covering Congress or to when I was covering the military to when I was covering music. It didn't really matter. Um, but you just have to buckle down and do the best thing that you can. And failing that, there's always Crown Peach.
Okay. Well, and I also know one of the things that you like to do that seems to calm you down is you love to bake. So, find that little hobby that, can, you know, take some of that stress away, or you can put the stress into it. Um,
I'm a big, you know that I'm a big scuba diver. I love diving.
yes.
So that's my happy place. And not just because the ocean is blue. Well, maybe. uh, but it's calming. You can't walk underwater. You hear yourself breathing. You can hear the parrotfish chewing, nibbling at the corals. You can see and feel the bubbles, feel the surge. Watch the, I'm sorry, my phone is blowing up.
Okay.
Um, watch the corals go back and forth in the waves, uh, and the beautiful fish. It's just that's a happy place for me. It's a relief, a release. Uh, and just quiet. Now, I also insist, I've done one dive in Lake Erie, and I will never do it again. I
I
found the
never
bottom when I
thought
hit it
about
with my,
diving in Lake Erie.
I found the bottom when I hit it with my face, because you can't
Oh,
see more than like 8 inches in front of you, and it's cold. I like to go to the Caribbean, or Fiji or someplace like that where the water temperature is 80 degrees. I'm
I,
okay with that.
that sounds pretty darn good. And for
Yeah.
those, who either, you know, don't like the water or don't like to be in the water, or be underwater, that would be me. I like the water, but I don't think I could go under it. That's just my
Gotcha.
problem. But there is something every day that we can find to be happy about. And I know sometimes people will say, come on, Karen, things are pretty terrible. Well, I went through a depression 12 years ago, went through it during January and February. And back then, that year, we had snow up to the rooftops, basically. It was ice cold. And I just like hovered in my bedroom. And
Mhm.
one day, my youngest son walked in and he saw the curtains were still closed and he opened them up. It was cloudy out. And I said, why'd you open them up? There's no sun out there. Just close them back up. He said, come here, mom. Come to the window. Went to the window. He said, look up at the sky. I said, yeah, it's gray. He goes, you know what's on the other side of those clouds? The sun. And as soon as he said that, it rang this bell. The sun means a lot to me. So if I can look outside and imagine the sun on the other side of the clouds,
Yeah,
that's even if it's only for a moment a day, I've got my moment.
good
And so
for
I'm
you.
asking everybody, find that something, or maybe go diving with Chuck.
Sure. The other things that you can do, is a book. You can go anywhere with a book. One of the problems I think we have as a country is that we don't read like we used to.
Yes.
Uh, and I'm a big fan of military science fiction, and I've read, my Kindle is full of it. Uh, so I'll read two, three, four books a week, and I'm in a different galaxy or with a different something like that. I'm in a different place. And for that brief time that I'm reading, I'm not suffering through what's happening right now. And I have my dogs too, and I love my
Absolutely.
dogs. So,
Well, I love reading about your dogs and you telling us about the walks that you take with them and accidentally slipping on the ice because of them. So
oh yeah, that was
those,
scary because I'm 68. I don't bounce
yeah,
anymore.
well, yeah, I know that. It broke my shoulder at Christmas. So, hey, I know what it means as we get older. Those bones, they
Oh
break
yeah,
easily.
I was a little nervous. I was fortunate when I did do that though, that two of my neighbors um, poked their noses out of their houses and asked if I was okay and would come over to help pick me up because I couldn't get up.
So
Uh,
that means that we do have good people in this world.
there are a few
And
good people, yeah.
we've got to reach out
And
to
I think
them.
we have the capacity to be good. Before we came on the air, I was telling you about this friend of mine, who's hardcore MAGA at my friend's bar. Um, well, I'll just kind of relate that story again. I had gotten some pretty vicious hate mail and posted a link to it on Facebook, and this guy came over and said, "You know, we are on opposite sides of the political spectrum, but I have some extra shotguns if you want one." Like, first off, I don't want a weapon in my house because, I have a wife. Secondly, though, he said, I I will do what nobody will hurt you. I will not let them. We can argue, but I will not let anybody hurt you. And these people were threatening me, like physically harm with physical harm. Um, he said, I don't want you to be hurt. So, and this guy is one who would come to the bar wearing "Let's Go Brandon" t-shirts, Trump hats, and all that kind of stuff. And he's still on his own Facebook page is as much red as I am blue. Um, but the fact that he would say something like that to me, take the time to come over and tell me, I will not let anybody hurt you, says to me, maybe there's hope. Maybe there's hope.
I think there are a lot of people on both sides of the fence that can come together. We don't have to agree, with each other.
Be pretty boring if we did.
Well, absolutely. I think about just marriage relationships. We don't agree with our spouses 24/7. And there are some days that, we want to run away from them. And we realize, hey, wait a second, if I run away, I'm probably running away from myself more than I am from you. So
I kind of like to go back to the John Kennedy saying. He said, let us not find a Republican solution or a Democratic solution. Let's find an American solution.
absolutely.
And I think we can do that. We've done it before. I just hope that we can do it. We still have the capacity to do it in 2 years.
We certainly
I'm afraid of what Musk and Trump are doing with the aid of Mike Johnson and Jim Jordan and the rest of that group. And JD Vance, frankly.
Well, I think all we can do right now is keep positive, keep talking about the things that are important. And, let's cultivate some people who can be our leaders. Because I think that's a big problem that we have in our world today. I know my oldest son, who will be 50 this year, when he was in high school, he kept saying, I'm going to be president someday. And he went to law school and he kept saying it. He was going to run for president someday. And he worked on Obama's campaign. And after Obama won, he said, I don't ever want to be president. He said, I saw things that I just don't want to ever be part of. And so he's supportive on the Democratic side. He's very active, but he said he would never run for office. And I'm grateful because I don't think I'd make it first mother of a president. So
You're too young. You couldn't be.
oh, you're right. Yeah. My boys are getting older, so am I. But in the meantime, I want to congratulate you on something because when we first met, you talked about Lizzie, but you guys weren't together at that time, and you are together. And that to me shows reconciliation and love. And I just love hearing about it all the time. So, Chuck,
Well, the secret is to have your heart blow up, so she has to come back and take care of you.
well, she's got to be an awfully good person. And I know you are awfully
She is.
good. And I want to thank you so much. And, keep the blue going.
Okay.
Thanks.
We'll have a wave one way or the other.
That's right. Have a great day.
You
Bye-bye
too.
now.
Thanks, Karen. I appreciate it.